January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Prevention Month, and during that time, the public is educated on how human trafficking works and is being combated. Here today are Alderwoman from the 26th Ward, Shameem Clark Hubbard, and Detective Sergeant from the Intelligence Division of the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department, Jatanya Claiborne-Muldrow. Thank you both for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So as we mentioned, January is National Slavery and Human Trafficking Month. It's something and a very important that we need to continue to raise awareness about. I feel like we get these blips in our media radar of different stories that happen, but really draw the focus. Before we get into the details with Detective Sergeant, I want to start with you. And how did you become an advocate for human trafficking, the prevention of human trafficking and sex trafficking?
Absolutely. So where it started was our Senator Jamila Nasheed reached out and said that at the state level, they have a resolution declaring January National Sex Trafficking Awareness Month in the state of Missouri, and that she think it would be a good thing to do it in the city, on the city level as well. And so then I reached out to Alderwoman Pam Boyd and talked to her about it, and we agreed, especially with the number of the way rather that it was affecting African American women, especially in our communities. We thought it would be a good thing for us to do. So we passed in bank on the St. Louis Board of Aldermen floor, Resolution 189, declaring it Sex Trafficking Awareness Month in St. Louis City as well. So since then, it's like I have just jumped off the deep end with all this information about making sure that people have the right information about sex trafficking, human trafficking, the differences, and not just going by what they hear, the sound bites, the stories, the social media posts and things that we all share, which I'm learning is a good thing that we share them, but it's still not enough. For me, it's always been about being proactive with things, starting with that I'm a mother of 5, 3 of them are girls. So for me, it's important to know what best practices I can do to try to prevent not just my daughters from being caught up in this situation, but other girls in the community, not just the community I serve in, but the community as a whole.
No, I think coming from, starting as a mother and then obviously as an alderwoman to get people to pay attention. And so I want to kind of break this down. Before we get into the details, I think we throw out these terms, human trafficking, sex trafficking, a lot without fully knowing what that actually entails. So Sergeant, let's just start it off. When we say human trafficking, what are we referring to?
So human trafficking is a modern day form of slavery. It involves force, fraud, and coercion, where the trafficker may use those elements to lure their victims into commercial sex work or forced labor work. So there's 2 types that we commonly hear, and that's sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Those are the 2 major forms of human trafficking that we often talk about.
Okay, so there's the umbrella, we should say then, when we start off with human trafficking, and then underneath that sexual, and then labor. And here in St. Louis, what are you seeing? I mean, what are we sort of not really, maybe people are blinded to know what's going on. What are you seeing day in, day out? This is, your area. What are we seeing?
So in St. Louis City, the cases that we investigate are predominantly and exclusively sex trafficking cases. I would say since January of 2015 until today's date, we have had over 358 referrals of human trafficking tips to our police department that we've investigated. Over 60% of those cases involve Black females, and over 50% of those cases involve minors.
And so what are the ages how is this happening? I mean, I sit here too as a mother, and I think of my children as well. And I mean, I think so many parents and grandparents out there. What is it, again, what's actually happening, and how can we prevent it?
Okay, so of those 358 cases that I mentioned earlier, we have not had a single case where a female victim was kidnapped. Most of these relationships are established between the trafficker and the female who believes that she's dating her trafficker. We call those types of traffickers Romeo pimps, where they will romance their victim and lure them away from home. They'll isolate that victim after a short amount of time, and then they will either force or trick the victim into commercial sex work.
I want to get into some more of those details. We're going to have to cut a break, and I want to ask you too, Alderwoman, about an event coming up, but we're going to get into the details of this upcoming event and more about human trafficking in a bit. But right now I have some full screen graphics for you to quickly take a look at. Right there you're seeing for the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. If you suspect human trafficking, please contact the police department. Obviously call 911 in an emergency. National Human Trafficking Hotline. The number's right there, 1-888-373 7888. And then we're also going to talk about this event that's coming up on January 31st. We'll talk about that. That's the graphic, but we're going to get into more details when we come back. So we're going to have more. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back after this break.